President Obama wrestling with how involved America should get in yet another terrible war in the Middle East. The president meeting with his national security team this weekend over those fresh reports that the Syrian government has used chemical weapons on its own people. Let's bring in ABC News Chief White House correspondent John Karl, who's filling in for George Stephanopoulos on this weekend. John is in Washington this morning. John, what are the options that the administration are considering here?
Well, it all comes down to airstrikes against the Syrian government, possible airstrikes against airfields, against military headquarters. But there is a divide, Dan, in the administration about how forcefully to respond. One thing that is not on the table is sending in ground forces. This would be some form of air attack to send a message to Syria that this is unacceptable and to degrade their ability to do it again.
You know, we all remember that this president was very, very critical of the last president, George W. Bush, for taking action in Iraq without UN approval. Is there any talk that President Obama this time would act unilaterally without UN approval?
Well, that is a big question, and something that is hotly debated right now in the White House is what to do in terms of the United Nations. As you know, Russia has a veto at the UN. Russia has blocked any measures to punish Syria up to this time. There is consideration of trying to go back to the UN, trying to convince the Russians that Syria has finally crossed a line here. But that is highly unlikely that Russia would go along. In the event that they don't, Dan, I am told by senior officials that the U.S. would not go alone, that this would have to be a coalition effort, if not with the UN, with other allies involved in committing resources, most likely NATO and our European allies.
To paraphrase the words of one of President Obama's aides in reference to a former conflict, this is a problem from hell for this administration. Yeah. John Karl, thank you. And John, by the way, we'll have much more on the crisis in the Middle East later this morning on This Week with ABC's Martha Raddatz co-anchoring from the region.